Commander Vextall of the Galactic survey ship Presumption had 3 advanced degrees in xenobiology, 2 in comparative species analysis, and absolutely 0 common sense, which explained why he was currently staring at his scanner readings with the kind of smug satisfaction usually reserved for academics who've just proven their thesis using entirely circular logic. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating, he muttered, adjusting his bio-spectacles for the 14th time in 10 minutes. The bridge of the Presumption hummed with the quiet efficiency of a ship designed by beings who believed intelligence was directly proportional to the number of unnecessary buttons on any given control panel. His assistant, Pip, whose full name was approximately 47 syllables long and sounded like someone gargling while having an allergic reaction, peered over his shoulder with the eager enthusiasm of someone who'd never been catastrophically wrong about anything important. What have you discovered, Commander?" Pip asked, his voice carrying that special blend of reverence and naivety that made Vextall feel like the intellectual giant he absolutely believed himself to be. "Observe this primitive world, Pip." Vextall gestured dramatically at the blue-green marble rotating slowly on their main display. "Third planet from an unremarkable yellow star. Initial scans indicate a dominant species that has somehow achieved basic spaceflight despite being, and I quote our instruments here, laughably weak." The scanner beeped helpfully, displaying what it considered to be Earth's apex predator statistics. According to the advanced galactic survey equipment, which had cost more than some planets' entire GDP, humans were slow, fragile, had pitiful jaw strength, and possessed claws so pathetic they barely registered on the danger scale. "Remarkable," Pitt breathed, completely missing the fact that their scanners were calibrated for silicon-based life forms and were about as useful for carbon-based analysis as a chocolate teapot. "How did such a weak species achieve dominance?" Vextall puffed up with the kind of pride that comes from being spectacularly wrong but not knowing it yet. "Elementary, my dear Pip. Clearly they've developed some form of primitive tool use to compensate for their obvious physical inadequacies. Note the energy signatures from their surface installations. Crude nuclear technology, basic electromagnetic communications, typical behavior of a species desperately trying to punch above their biological weight class." What their scanners had actually detected were things like nuclear power plants, television broadcasts, and internet infrastructure. What Vextall interpreted this as was a species barely clinging to survival through technological desperation. "But sir," Pitt said, squinting at the readings with the concentration of someone trying to read instructions that had been translated through 17 different languages, "I'm detecting numerous other species on the planet's surface, many with significantly higher predator rankings than the humans." This was where Vextall's academic arrogance reached truly spectacular heights. "Ah yes, I noticed that as well," he waved dismissively at the scanner data showing various Earth fauna. "Clearly, this planet operates on a complex ecosystem where the humans exist in some form of servitude to their biological superiors. Look at these readings. Large quadrupedal carnivores with enhanced jaw strength, smaller feline predators with retractable claws, even some sort of massive ungulates that appear to be used for manual labor." Pip nodded sagely, completely buying into this interpretation. Their scanners were picking up dogs, cats, horses, and various other domestic animals, but lacking any context about domestication, a concept so foreign to galactic civilization that their languages didn't even have words for it. They assumed humans were some sort of servant species. "So the humans are basically slaves?" Pip asked. "Servants, at minimum. Possibly a food source." Vextall stroked what passed for his chin among his species. "Notice how the humans appear to gather the waste products of these other species? Classic subordinate behavior." What he'd observed were people walking dogs and cleaning up after them, farmers collecting eggs, and various other routine activities that made perfect sense if you understood the concept of animal husbandry. But to aliens who had never encountered domestication, it looked like humans were definitely the bottom of the food chain. "This presents an excellent opportunity for first contact," Vextall continued, warming to his theme. "We approach the humans as the obviously oppressed servant class, offer them liberation from their biological overlords. Standard galactic protocol for primitive species uplift." Pip made notes on his datapad, with the diligence of someone who had never considered that their boss might be completely, catastrophically, world-endingly wrong. "Shall I set course for the surface, sir?" "Indeed. But first, we report back to the Council. This discovery could revolutionize our understanding of interspecies dynamics, An entire planet where the weakest species has somehow survived by accepting subservience to their natural predators? The academic papers alone will secure my tenure for the next 3 centuries. And so, with the kind of confidence that can only come from being incredibly educated and utterly clueless, the crew of the Presumption began preparations for what they were certain would go down in history as a textbook example of successful first contact with a primitive species. They had no idea they were about to discover something that would fundamentally challenge everything they thought they knew about the nature of strength, intelligence, and the terrifying concept that some species don't just survive their predators, they make friends with them. The Grand Council Chamber of Galactic University was the kind of place designed to make everyone feel simultaneously impressed and slightly nauseous. Floating crystal podiums, walls that shifted between dimensions, and seating arrangements that defied at least 3 laws of physics. It was architecture by committee, assuming the committee consisted entirely of beings who had read too many philosophy textbooks and had access to unlimited construction budgets. Vextal stood at the central presentation platform, practically vibrating with excitement. Around him, arranged in a perfect circle because apparently even advanced alien civilizations couldn't escape the appeal of looking important, sat the Council of Superior Beings. Each member represented a different galactic species, and each was absolutely convinced they were the smartest creature in the room. Esteemed colleagues, Vextal began, his voice carrying the particular tone of academic smugness that suggested he was about to revolutionize everything forever. Today I present findings that will fundamentally reshape our understanding of primitive planetary ecosystems. Counselor Thexmar, a crystalline being whose species had evolved from living gemstones and never let anyone forget it, leaned forward with interest. You've discovered a new form of apex predator dominance? Even better, Vextal replied, clicking to his first holographic slide with theatrical flair. I've discovered a planet where the weakest species has survived by accepting their natural place in the food chain. The hologram displayed Earth, rotating slowly, with various data overlays that looked incredibly impressive and were completely wrong. Murmurs of interest rippled through the council chamber. Professor Keekslin, whose species resembled what would happen if an octopus went to law school and developed strong opinions about proper academic citation, raised several tentacles skeptically. Explain this hierarchy you've observed. Vextal practically bounced with enthusiasm. The planet features multiple apex predator species, all significantly superior to the dominant humanoids in every measurable category. Yet somehow, the humans have not only survived but appear to actively serve these superior beings. He clicked to the next slide, showing blurry surveillance footage of a human walking a dog. To the assembled council of beings who had never encountered pet ownership, it looked like exactly what Vextal claimed it was. Observe. A human creature, clearly subservient, being led around by one of the apex carnivores. Note how the human carefully collects and disposes of the predator's waste products. Classic servant behavior. Counselor Blixton, who looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with a tax auditor, clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Fascinating, and the humans provide what service in return for not being consumed? Multiple services, apparently. Vextal was really hitting his stride now. They construct elaborate shelters for these predators, provide regular food offerings, and even engage in what appears to be grooming behavior. In return, the predators allow them to continue existing. Professor Keekslin's tentacles writhed with academic excitement. A genuine symbiotic relationship between predator and prey species? This contradicts everything we know about evolutionary pressure. Precisely, Vextal said, clicking to another slide showing a cat being petted. To him it looked like ritualistic submission behavior. The humans appear to have evolved beyond the typical fight-or-flight response and developed what I term submission adaptation. They've literally evolved to serve. The council erupted in excited chatter. This was the kind of discovery that won tenure, secured research grants, and got your name attached to entire academic theories. Counselor Thexmar's crystalline form sparkled with interest. Have you made contact with these servant humans? Not yet, Vextal replied. We wanted council approval before initiating first contact protocols. Given their obvious subservient nature, we believe they'll be eager to accept galactic citizenship in exchange for liberation from their biological overlords. This was where Dr. Creeknell spoke up. She was the council's expert in primitive species psychology, and she had the kind of reputation that came from being right about things when everyone else was catastrophically wrong. Unfortunately, she also had a tendency toward caution that her colleagues often interpreted as lack of vision. Commander, she said carefully. Are you certain you've correctly interpreted these behavioral patterns? Sometimes what appears to be subservience can actually indicate something quite different. The rest of the council turned to look at her with the kind of polite attention usually reserved for someone who's about to say something tedious but technically necessary. Vextal waved dismissively. Dr. Cricknell, with all due respect, the data is quite clear. These humans have somehow achieved technological development, despite being physically inferior to every other species on their planet. The only logical explanation is that they've done so in service to their biological superiors. But what if, Dr. Cricknell began. The evidence speaks for itself, Professor Keeksland interrupted, his tentacles waving with the authority of someone who had published extensively and wasn't about to let contrary evidence complicate a good theory. This represents a unique opportunity to study submission adaptation in a natural environment. Counselor Blixton clicked his mandibles in agreement. And potentially gain insights that could benefit our own relationships with less developed species. Dr. Cricknell sat back, her concerns overruled by the collective excitement of beings who were absolutely convinced they understood a situation they had never actually encountered before. Very well, Counselor Thexmar announced formally. The Council approves first contact with this servant species. Commander Vextall, you will approach them as liberators, offer them freedom from biological oppression in exchange for joining galactic civilization as a protectorate species. Vextall practically glowed with academic triumph. It will be a textbook example of successful primitive species integration. And so, with the full backing of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, the crew of the Presumption received authorization to make contact with humanity. They were going to offer liberation to a species that had never been enslaved, freedom from oppression that had never existed, and protection from predators that brought them sticks and purred when petted. It was going to be educational for everyone involved. The Johnson family of 42 Maple Street, Suburbia, USA was having what they considered a perfectly normal Saturday morning, which is to say, Dad Mike was attempting to fix the garbage disposal while simultaneously preventing their golden retriever Buddy from helping. Mom Lisa was trying to get their 8-year-old daughter Emma to eat something that wasn't sugar-coated, and the general chaos level was hovering at what experts call standard American household weekend equilibrium. This peaceful domestic scene was interrupted by what sounded like someone had thrown a washing machine full of wind chimes off a tall building. Did you hear that? Lisa asked, pausing mid-negotiation with Emma over the nutritional value of Lucky Charms. Hear what? Mike replied from under the sink, his voice muffled by plumbing, and the kind of creative profanity that comes from discovering that the previous homeowner had installed the garbage disposal, using what appeared to be wishful thinking and duct tape. The washing machine wind chime sound repeated, this time accompanied by a bright flash of light that made their backyard look like someone had briefly turned on a small sun. Buddy, who had been lounging in that particular way golden retrievers do when they're pretending they weren't just trying to steal bacon off the counter, suddenly perked up with the alert interest of a dog who sensed something was not according to normal backyard protocols. Mom, there's something weird in our yard, Emma announced, pressing her face against the kitchen window with the fearless curiosity of a child who hadn't yet learned that weird things in your backyard might be cause for concern. Lisa joined her at the window and immediately experienced the peculiar sensation of her brain trying to process something it had no previous reference for. Sitting in their backyard, right between Mike's failed attempt at a vegetable garden and Emma's swing set, was what could only be described as a spacecraft. It looked like someone had taken a traditional flying saucer design and asked a committee of engineers to make it more practical, resulting in something that was clearly alien but also somehow reminded Lisa of a minivan. Mike, she called, using the tone wives reserve for moments when normal communication is insufficient for the situation at hand. You need to see this. Can it wait? I'm in the middle of... Mike's response was cut off by the sound of a door hissing open with the kind of mechanical precision that suggested whoever had built this thing had never heard of squeaky hinges. Two figures emerged from the spacecraft, and if the Johnson family had been the type to keep up with xenobiology journals, they might have recognized Commander Vextall and his assistant Pip. As it was, they just saw two beings who looked like what would happen if someone tried to describe generic alien to someone who had only ever seen aliens in movies but was really bad at remembering detail. Vextall approached their back door with the confident stride of someone who was absolutely certain he understood the situation. Behind him, Pip followed with the nervous energy of an assistant who was beginning to suspect his boss might be about to do something spectacularly stupid, but wasn't quite sure what. Mike emerged from under the sink, took one look at the situation, and experienced the uniquely human response of polite confusion in the face of the completely unprecedented. He said, which was probably the most reasonable response possible under the circumstances. Can I help you? Vextall activated his universal translator, a device that was the pinnacle of galactic linguistic technology and could instantly translate any known language, assuming the language had been properly catalogued and the cultural context was understood, which in this case it absolutely wasn't. Greetings, subservient human, Vextall announced in what he believed was a tone of benevolent authority. I am Commander Vextall of the Galactic Survey. We have come to liberate you from your biological oppressors. The Johnson family exchanged the kind of looks that families share when confronted with something so far outside their normal experience that their usual communication methods had to be completely recalibrated. I'm sorry, what now? Lisa asked, demonstrating the impressive human ability to remain polite even when confronted with something that made no sense whatsoever. We are here to free you from the predatory species that have enslaved your kind, Pip added helpfully, consulting his notes with the diligence of someone who was absolutely convinced he was being helpful. Predatory species, Mike repeated slowly, glancing around their suburban backyard as if expecting to suddenly notice lions hiding behind the garden gnomes. This was the moment when Buddy decided to investigate these new arrivals. Being a golden retriever, his approach to unknown situations was guided by the fundamental principle that anything new might potentially result in belly rubs, treats, or at minimum some form of positive attention. He trotted over to the aliens with his tail wagging in that universal canine greeting that translates roughly to, "Hello there, you seem interesting. Are you friend-shaped?" Vextall froze. According to his extensive research, he was now face to face with one of Earth's apex predators, a creature whose bite force, according to his scanners, was sufficient to crush bones, whose speed exceeded human capabilities, and whose pack-hunting instincts made them formidable adversaries. The fact that this particular apex predator was currently wagging its entire back half and making the sort of happy panting sounds that suggested it was having the best day ever did not compute with his theoretical framework. Do not fear, Vextall announced, his voice only slightly strained by the effort of maintaining academic composure while a golden retriever sniffed his lower appendages with scientific interest. We shall protect you from this savage beast. Emma, who had been watching this entire exchange with the fascination of a child witnessing adults be confused about something she understood perfectly, couldn't contain herself any longer. Savage beast? She giggled. That's just Buddy. He's a good boy, aren't you, Buddy? At the sound of his name, Buddy's tail wagging intensified to the point where his entire body wiggled with joy. He sat down and offered his paw to Vextall in the universal dog gesture of, "Hello, new friend, please acknowledge my excellent manners." Vextall stared at the offered paw as if it were a loaded weapon, which, according to his research, it essentially was. The predator wishes to make physical contact, he whispered to Pip, who was frantically taking notes while trying to maintain what he hoped was a safe distance from what their instruments insisted was a dangerous carnivore. Oh, for crying out loud, Mike said, demonstrating the human capacity for exasperation in the face of cosmic absurdity. He walked over and gave Buddy the requested attention, scratching behind his ears in the way that made Buddy's back leg do that little kicking thing that golden retrievers do when they've found their happiness spot. See, he's harmless, Mike explained to two alien beings who were watching this display with the horrified fascination of scientists watching someone casually pet a tiger. Harmless? Vextall's voice cracked slightly, but our instruments clearly indicate. Your instruments are probably confused by his breakfast, Lisa said pragmatically. He ate 3 cups of kibble, half a tennis ball, and what I'm pretty sure was one of Mike's socks. He's more likely to lick you to death than bite you. And that's when Buddy, proving Lisa's point with the impeccable timing that only dogs possess, decided that these new visitors clearly needed the full golden retriever welcome experience. He approached Vextall with his tongue out and proceeded to demonstrate the species' legendary capacity for enthusiastic face-licking. Vextall's worldview began to crumble in real time. Now, up until this point, Buddy had been operating under his standard golden retriever assumption that all new visitors were potential friends who had simply not yet realized they wanted to throw tennis balls and provide belly rubs. However, golden retrievers, despite their reputation for friendliness, possess something that Vextall's scanners had actually gotten right: highly developed pack instincts and an absolutely unwavering loyalty to their family. And Buddy was beginning to sense that these weird-smelling strangers were making his humans uncomfortable. The transformation was subtle at first. His tail wagging slowed from helicopter propeller to cautious metronome. His ears shifted from happily floppy to alert and focused. His entire body language changed from new friends to potential situation requiring assessment. Mike noticed it immediately, because anyone who's lived with dogs learns to read the subtle shift from everything is awesome to everything might not be awesome and I am prepared to do something about it. Easy boy, Mike said quietly, but Buddy had already moved to position himself between the aliens and Emma, still maintaining his polite sitting position but now with the focused attention of a security professional. Vextall, meanwhile, was having what could only be described as an academic crisis. His instruments were insisting that the creature currently staring at him with polite but unwavering attention was capable of significant violence, while his direct observation suggested it was more interested in having its ears scratched than eating anyone. Perhaps, he said to Pip in their native language, we should reassess our initial analysis. That's when Pip made the mistake that transformed a merely awkward first contact into a neighborhood-wide incident. In his nervousness, he activated his emergency scanner, which immediately began beeping, flashing, and generally making the sort of aggressive technological noises that every dog in a 3-block radius interpreted as threat to pack detected. Buddy's response was immediate and decisive. The friendly neighborhood golden retriever disappeared, replaced by something that Vextall's instruments finally recognized as the apex predator they'd been measuring. Buddy didn't bark. He issued what could only be described as a warning, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to come from somewhere around his ankles and suggested that continued scanner beeping would be inadvisable. "Oh no," Lisa said, recognizing the sound. "Buddy, it's okay. They're just—" He was interrupted by the arrival of backup. Rex, the German shepherd from 2 houses down, had heard Buddy's alert and decided to investigate. Rex approached the situation with the purposeful stride of a dog who took neighborhood security seriously and had opinions about strangers with beeping devices. Then came Princess, the Rottweiler from across the street, who despite her name was built like a small tank and had the kind of protective instincts that made pizza delivery drivers leave packages at the curb. Within minutes, the Johnsons' backyard had become a demonstration of something that Vextall's academic training had never covered: suburban pack dynamics. "This is fascinating," Pip whispered, still taking notes even as 6 different dogs arranged themselves in what was clearly a defensive formation. They're exhibiting coordinated protective behavior, without any apparent command structure. "Pip," Vextall said carefully, "I think we may have made a miscalculation." The miscalculation became even more apparent when Mrs. Henderson from next door arrived with her 2 cats, Mr. Whiskers and Duchess. Now, cats generally don't involve themselves in dog drama, but they had heard the commotion and decided that if there was going to be a neighborhood incident, they wanted front row seats. They perched themselves on the fence with the casual authority of creatures who knew they could disappear in 3 directions if things got interesting. "Oh, hello there," Mrs. Henderson called cheerfully to the aliens, apparently unfazed by the fact that 2 obvious extraterrestrials were standing in her neighbor's yard. "Are you the new people Mike mentioned moving in?" This was peak suburban hospitality, the assumption that any strangers in the neighborhood were probably new residents who might need directions to the good grocery store, or recommendations for local contractors. Vextall stared at this elderly human female who was treating first contact with alien civilization as a casual, neighborly introduction, while simultaneously being flanked by 2 creatures his instruments insisted were stealth predators, capable of climbing vertical surfaces. "We are explorers," he managed to say. "How nice," Mrs. Henderson beamed. "Exploring the neighborhood, it's lovely this time of year, though you might want to be careful with all those flashy gadgets. The dogs get nervous about strange noises." As if to emphasize her point, Buddy issued another low rumble, and the other dogs shifted slightly closer. It wasn't aggressive, yet, but it was unmistakably clear that any further beeping would be taken as escalation. "Pip," Vextall whispered in growing panic, "turn off the scanner." "But, sir, we're gathering unprecedented behavioral data." "Turn it off now." Pip reluctantly deactivated the device, and immediately the tension level dropped. Buddy's tail resumed a cautious wag, though he maintained his protective positioning. The other dogs relaxed slightly but remained alert. Emma, who had been watching this entire diplomatic crisis with the clear-eyed assessment of a child who understood pack dynamics better than trained xenobiologists, decided to be helpful. "They're not going to hurt you if you don't act scary," she explained to the aliens with the patience of someone explaining basic concepts to particularly slow adults. "Dogs can tell when you're nervous. Just be normal." "Normal," Vextall repeated faintly. Yeah, like this. Emma walked over to Rex, who immediately transformed from neighborhood security back to attention-seeking pet the moment she scratched his chest. See? He's just protecting us, because that's what good dogs do. Protecting them. The word hit Vextal like a revelation delivered by academic lightning. These weren't predators keeping humans as servants. These were predators who had chosen to protect humans. The entire power dynamic he'd observed and theorized about was completely backwards. "Pip," he whispered, his voice filled with the particular horror that comes from realizing you've been catastrophically wrong about something fundamental. "I don't think the humans serve these creatures." "What do you mean, sir?" Vextal watched as Mike calmly explained to Princess that the visitors weren't threats while simultaneously preventing Buddy from investigating whether alien boots were suitable for retrieval games. He observed Mrs. Henderson offering directions to the local dog park to beings from another galaxy. He noted how Emma could apparently command the attention and affection of creatures his instruments insisted were capable of taking down prey twice their size. "I think," Vextal said slowly, his academic world crumbling around him, "the creatures serve the humans. Willingly." The moment of truth came when Mike Johnson, demonstrating the human capacity for patience in the face of cosmic weirdness, decided to clear up what was obviously a misunderstanding. "Look," he said, settling into the kind of reasonable tone people use when explaining something that should be obvious. "I think there's been some confusion here. You keep calling our pets predators and talking about liberation, but honestly, I'm not sure what you think is going on." Vextal's translator struggled with the concept of pets, a word that had no equivalent in any galactic language because the very idea of voluntary cross-species companionship was so foreign that most civilizations couldn't even conceive of it. "Pets?" Vextal repeated, his voice filled with the kind of careful confusion that comes from encountering a concept that breaks your understanding of how reality works. "Yeah, you know," Lisa joined in, apparently deciding that if they were going to have first contact, they might as well do it properly. "Companion animals. Dogs, cats, horses. We take care of them, they provide friendship and companionship. It's been that way for thousands of years." Emma, with the helpful enthusiasm of a child who loved explaining things, decided to provide a practical demonstration. She whistled, and Buddy immediately trotted over, sat down, and looked at her with the patient attention of a dog waiting for instructions. "Buddy, shake," Emma commanded. Buddy politely offered his paw, which Emma shook with great ceremony before giving him a treat from her pocket. "See?" she said to the aliens who were watching this exchange with the fascinated horror of scientists observing something that violated several fundamental laws of nature. "He does what I ask because we're friends and I give him treats and belly rubs." Pip was frantically taking notes, his instruments going haywire trying to categorize what they were witnessing. But this creature could easily overpower the small human. Why does it submit to commands?" "Because that's what dogs do," Mike explained with the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing basic reality. "We domesticated them, bred them from wolves over thousands of generations to be companions." The word domesticated hit Vextal's translator and promptly caused it to have what could only be described as a linguistic breakdown. The device started making confused beeping sounds as it tried to process a concept that didn't exist in galactic civilization. "Domesticated," Vextal repeated slowly. "You changed them? Genetically?" "Well, sort of," Lisa said. "More like we selectively bred them. Kept the ones that were friendly and loyal, bred them with other friendly and loyal ones. Eventually we got dogs." "You turned wolves into this?" Pip gestured at Buddy, who had rolled over and was wiggling happily in the grass, tongue lolling out in pure contentment. "Pretty much," Mike confirmed. "Same thing with cats, horses, cows. Humans have been domesticating animals for agriculture and companionship for millennia. It's not unusual at all." What Mike didn't realize was that he had just casually described something that was not just unusual in galactic civilization, it was considered theoretically impossible. The idea that one species could deliberately alter another species over time, not through conquest or genetic manipulation technology, but through patience, selective breeding, and mutual cooperation, was so far outside the galactic understanding of evolution that their science didn't have frameworks to describe it. Vextal's legs gave out, and he sat down heavily in the grass, staring at Buddy with the expression of someone whose entire understanding of biological relationships had just been turned inside out. "You're telling me," he said faintly, "that your species took apex predators, wolves, and through some form of collaborative evolution, turned them into creatures that willingly protect and serve you?" "I wouldn't say serve," Lisa corrected thoughtfully. "More like partner with us. It's mutually beneficial. They get food, shelter, medical care, and affection. We get companionship, protection, and help with various tasks. Mrs. Henderson, who had been listening to this conversation with the polite interest of someone overhearing neighbors discuss their vacation plans, decided to add her perspective. "Oh yes, it's wonderful having pets," she chimed in. "Mr. Whiskers here keeps the mice away, and Duchess is excellent company during my evening stories. In return, they get gourmet cat food and the best sunny windowsills in the house." She scratched Duchess behind the ears, and the cat responded with a purr that Vextal's instruments registered as a low-frequency vibration typically associated with contentment in predatory species. "The feline is happy?" Pip asked in amazement. "Of course she's happy," Mrs. Henderson replied. "Why wouldn't she be? She's got everything a cat could want: food, safety, attention, and humans trained to open doors for her." That last comment caused Vextal to look up sharply. "Trained?" Mrs. Henderson laughed. "Oh yes, cats train their humans quite thoroughly. Dogs too, really. Buddy there has Mike trained to throw tennis balls for hours, and Lisa trained to give him treats whenever he does that head tilt thing." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Buddy demonstrated the head tilt thing, angling his head in that particular way that golden retrievers use when they want to look extra adorable. Lisa immediately produced a treat from her pocket. "See?" Mrs. Henderson said triumphantly. Vextal watched this exchange with the growing horror of someone realizing that not only had he completely misunderstood the situation, but the situation was far more complex and terrifying than anything he had originally theorized. "So," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "humans didn't just domesticate predators. The predators domesticated the humans as well." "I guess you could look at it that way," Mike agreed cheerfully. "It's really more of a partnership. We evolved together." "Evolved together," Vextal repeated numbly. "Coevolution," Emma added helpfully, having learned the term in school. "Like flowers and bees, they both changed over time to help each other." The final piece of Vextal's sanity crumbled as he realized the full implications of what he was hearing. Humans hadn't just survived alongside predators. They had formed voluntary partnerships with them. They had deliberately altered the evolutionary path of other species through patience and cooperation, and the predators had chosen to participate. "Pip," he whispered, "we need to leave. Now." "But sir, the research opportunities." "Pip," Vextal said, his voice filled with the quiet terror of someone who had just realized they were dealing with something far beyond their understanding. "We are not dealing with a servant species. We are dealing with a species that makes friends with their predators, and those predators chose to stay." The retreat of the Galactic survey ship Presumption from Earth's orbit was later described in official reports as a strategic withdrawal to reassess initial findings. What actually happened was that Vextal sprinted to his ship with the desperate speed of someone who had just realized he was standing in the middle of something that redefined the entire concept of dangerous. "Emergency departure!" he shouted to his crew, the moment he stumbled through the airlock. "Maximum speed! Alert the council immediately!" Behind them, the Johnson family waved goodbye from their backyard with the friendly politeness of people who had just met some slightly odd neighbors. Emma had given Pip a drawing of Buddy, which he was now clutching like it contained state secrets. Mrs. Henderson had sent them off with directions to the good pizza place and an invitation to come back any time. The emergency council session was convened within hours of the Presumption's return to Galactic University. Vextal stood before the assembled beings, no longer the confident academic who had presented his findings just days earlier. He looked like someone who had stared into the abyss and discovered it was wagging its tail. "Esteemed colleagues," he began, his voice shaky, "I must report that our initial assessment of the Earth species was incomplete." Counselor Thexmar leaned forward with interest. "Did you successfully make contact with the servant humans?" "There are no servant humans," Vextal announced, causing a ripple of confusion through the chamber. "The humans are not subservient to the predator species. The predator species are voluntary companions who have been genetically modified through a process the humans call domestication." The silence that followed was the kind usually reserved for moments when someone has said something so fundamentally disturbing that it takes time for minds to process it. Professor Keeksland's tentacles writhed with confusion. "Modified how? Through what technology?" "No technology," Vextal replied, his voice growing stronger as academic horror overcame personal fear. "Through patience, selective breeding, and what they term friendship. They took wolves, apex pack hunters, and over thousands of generations, turned them into creatures that voluntarily protect human offspring and perform tasks in exchange for food and affection. Dr. Cricknell, who had been sitting quietly during this revelation, spoke up with the tone of someone who had suspected something like this might happen. And these domesticated predators, they remain capable of violence? Fully capable, Vextal confirmed. Our instruments detected no reduction in physical capabilities, but they choose not to use them against humans. In fact, they actively defend humans from threats. The council chamber erupted in alarmed chatter. The concept of voluntary interspecies cooperation was disturbing enough, but the idea that predators would choose to protect another species went against everything they understood about natural selection and survival instincts. Counselor Blixton clicked his mandibles nervously. You're saying these humans have created an army of loyal predators who fight for them by choice? Not just an army, Vextal said, his voice taking on the quality of someone delivering the most terrifying news imaginable. A family. The predators consider the humans to be part of their pack structure. They will defend human children as if they were their own offspring. The implications of this statement slowly sank in around the chamber. A species that could inspire such loyalty in natural predators wasn't just dangerous. They represented a completely foreign approach to survival that no one in the galactic community had ever encountered. Emergency vote, Counselor Thexmar announced, her crystalline form flickering with urgent patterns. All in favor of immediate reclassification of humans from primitive servant species to, she paused, trying to find an appropriate category, to approach with extreme caution. The vote was unanimous. Furthermore, Dr. Cricknow added, I move that Earth be designated as a protected world pending further study of these domestication techniques. The motion passed without discussion. Within hours, emergency broadcasts went out across the galaxy. Earth, previously noted as an insignificant world populated by weak bipeds, was suddenly reclassified as the home of a species capable of inspiring voluntary loyalty and apex predators. The official designation was Species of Special Interest, Approach, only with full diplomatic protocols. The unofficial designation, whispered in the corridors of academic institutions and military compounds across the galaxy, was the species that makes friends with things that eat other species. Back on Earth, completely unaware that they had just achieved galactic recognition through the sheer terror-inducing concept of pet ownership, the Johnson family finished their Saturday with pizza and a movie. Buddy spent the evening contentedly chewing on a tennis ball, blissfully unaware that he had just redefined humanity's place in the cosmic order simply by being a very good boy. Mrs. Henderson called her sister to tell her about the nice young people she'd met who seemed a bit lost, but were very polite. Emma added her drawing of Buddy meeting aliens to the collection on the refrigerator. And Mike finally fixed the garbage disposal because even after first contact with galactic civilization, suburban life goes on. Meanwhile, somewhere in the depths of space, the word spread through trading posts and diplomatic stations. Earth was the planet where the predators chose to stay. And if that wasn't terrifying enough to earn respectful distance from every advanced civilization in the galaxy, nothing was. The Johnson family never did find out why their property taxes were mysteriously eliminated the following year, or why their neighborhood was suddenly designated as a galactic cultural preservation zone. They just figured the city had finally gotten its act together. After all, stranger things had happened, though admittedly not many.